Hello everyone, I'm Noble and I'll be discussing key concepts in microeconomics using a topic, and my partner Cooper will be covering macroeconomics. So my microeconomics topic will be based on Saudi Arabia's excess tax on carbonated and energy drinks. So in Saudi Arabia, there was high consumption of carbonated and energy drinks, and that actually contributed to rising obesity rates and diet-related diseases, because of they contained unhealthy supplements like sugar and caffeine. And in 2016, the country was actually ranked fourth in the world for the highest calorie intake from carbonated beverages. And that same year, a high body mass index and poor dietary habits were actually the main causes of disability adjusted life years, which is when an individual loses 1 year of full health. And so the government responded to these issues that were occurring by introducing a tax in 2017. And that tax included a 50% tax on carbonated drinks and a 100% tax on energy drinks. And this was done as a public health measure aimed at reducing the overconsumption and to encourage consumers to take healthier choices. Okay, so I'll be representing how the carbonated and energy drink market looked like before the tax using a market equilibrium graph. So before the tax, the equilibrium of the carbonated and energy drink market in Saudi Arabia are given with the price without tax, which is PE, where the equilibrium price that buyers usually paid and the price that sellers received was equal. Now the reason it was equal is because there was no need to pay that extra portion for tax, to pay to the government for tax. And also the equilibrium for the quantity of drinks being sold and bought are also represented by QE. Okay, so now I'd like to demonstrate what happened after Saudi Arabia actually introduced the taxes. So now since the tax is actually imposed, the consumer surplus actually declines, because as seen by the purple area. This is because households and buyers now actually have to pay a higher price for the beverages than they usually would, and this is seen by the increase of P2 as it's above P1. Now, since this price paid by consumers increases, it actually reduces the gap, between what they're actually willing to pay than the higher price that they actually have to pay, which is P2. And so, therefore, this decreases consumer welfare. Now, the producer surplus also declines because since producers pay taxes, they receive less revenue. This is seen by the P3, it's below P1, which they would usually pay. Now, even if the price paid by consumers increases, the portion that actually goes to producers is still reduced because of the tax. Therefore, this decreases producer welfare. However, this tax incidence actually falls more heavily on consumers because distributors and producers actually pass most of this tax on to consumers and households by increasing the prices of the beverages even more even on top of the tax. And this places an even higher financial burden on consumers rather than producers just absorbing most of the burden themselves. Now, the tax actually reduces the quantity of products sold as seen from the Q1 to Q2, because since the price of either drink has increased, the quantity demanded by households and consumers decreases, and therefore this creates inefficient consumer and producer surplus activity in the market. Therefore, there's a deadweight loss, which indicates the loss of economic efficiency, and which is resulting from transactions that no longer occur because of the tax imposed. Now I'll actually demonstrate using demand elasticity using PED to show how the consumers actually responded in response to this tax. And I'll use statistics to show why consumers actually bought most of the tax. Now, after the 2017 implementation, carbonated drink purchases in Saudi Arabia actually fell by 41%, and energy drink purchases dropped by 58% by 2018 compared to the 2016 purchases. Now, over the same period, the carbonated prices actually increased by 67. That actually means that consumers bore a greater share of the tax burden. Now, this PED's example is only based on carbonated drinks because energy drinks was not, the statistics was not found online. Now, as you can see, now if you apply the formula, I get the result of 0.61. Now, this means that the elasticity is actually inelastic of the demand because it's less than 1. So, since it's less than 1, that means that consumers are actually relatively unresponsive for the quantity demanded compared to the price increase of the beverages. And a reason for this could be because of maybe a lack of close substitutes for carbonated and um, energy drinks. Now, the overconsumption of these unhealthy beverages in Saudi Arabia has actually caused negative externalities to arise, like diet-related issues, obesity, which lead to healthcare costs. That's the main one, because the Saudi Arabia government actually covers most of the public healthcare costs for consumers, and this reduces their capacity to invest in other public goods and services that actually help the people and households in Saudi Arabia. And so, before the introduction of the tax, the marginal social benefit is actually lower than the marginal private benefit. This highlights the negative externality in consumption between the gap, and it shows that consumers focus more on the private satisfaction of drinking the good. And the overconsumption actually occurs at quantity QM, as you can see in the graph. And so to correct this actual negative externality, Saudi Arabia introduced this tax so they can internalize this externality by increasing the private cost of consumption so consumers can reduce the intake. And this is actually seen with the shift in the demand curve to the left from EM towards E optimal in order to align consumers' private behavior with the social optimum, where MSB equals MSC. However, this will actually take time to take effect because households will continue to drink these beverages because of the lack of substitutes.
I will now be discussing the macroeconomics portion of this presentation. So first I'll be discussing Macau's GDP, and then I'll be discussing Macau's inflation rate. Alright, so Macau's GDP is shown from the years of 2015 to 2025 in the chart below. So we've got the blue line is the GDP for each year, and then the dotted line is the trend line. So if we look before COVID, it has really strong pre-pandemic growth. So Macau's GDP saw robust growth from 2015 to 2019, where it peaked at over 55 billion US dollars. So then the pandemic hit. It had a severe impact for the years 2020, 2021, and 2022. And we saw a dramatic economic downturn, with GDP plummeting to around $25 billion due to the global crisis. So then we can see after 2022 a strong rebound into 2023, where the GDP bounces right back up to 45.8 billion US dollars. And then now it is, so for last year, it climbed back up to over $50 billion, and it's projected to go up to $53 billion in 2025. Now, despite the downward sloping trend line, I think that if you look at it from the perspective of COVID really destroyed the economy, that it looks like the GDP will probably continue growing into future years, but at the moment that is just speculation. So the below chart outlines Macau's inflation rate from 2015 to 2025. So it has a high initial inflation. So in 2015, it was at 4.6%, which indicates a period of rising prices. Then there's a significant drop and it seems very volatile. So between 2015 and 2017, the inflation rate decreased sharply to 1.2%, followed by an increase to 3% in 2018, which highlights some volatility in price levels. Then once we get to 2021, there's an inflation rate of 0%, which means that prices seemingly remain unchanged. Then over the past couple of years, it has a really low inflation rate, and it seems to be stabilizing at around that below 1% line. Thank you for listening to our presentation where we discussed beverage tax in Saudi Arabia, where the consumption got closer to the optimal level, And we also discussed Macau's GDP and inflation rate and how COVID had a huge impact on the state.